A new world, a new struggle. The year was 2157, and the Galactic Academy on planet Zephyrus stood as a beacon of knowledge, drawing in the brightest minds from across the universe. For Cora, a young Elani girl, attending this prestigious institution was a dream come true. The Academy promised endless possibilities, a chance to explore the mysteries of the cosmos, and the opportunity to meet beings from every corner of the galaxy. However, for Cora, this dream had quickly turned into a nightmare. Cora had always been frail, her delicate blue feathers and slight frame making her an easy target among the more physically imposing species at the Academy. Despite her intelligence and gentle nature, she was seen as weak, an easy victim for those who sought to assert their dominance. One such bully was Reeve, a towering Krogan whose reptilian features and muscular build struck fear into many students. Reeve's gang followed him everywhere, a group of like-minded thugs who thrived on intimidation and cruelty. One day, during a free period, Cora found herself cornered in a hallway. Reeve and his gang had been waiting for her, and with no one else around, they seized the opportunity to torment her. Reeve's clawed hand lashed out, striking Cora across the face and sending her sprawling to the floor. Her blood splattered on the polished academy floor, and her feathers were yanked out as she cried out in pain. The sound of her suffering echoed through the halls, but no one came to her aid. Her classmates, who had previously been friendly, now watched in apathetic silence, unwilling to cross Reeve and become targets themselves. It was at that moment that Brian Johnson, a human student, happened upon the scene. Brian was a newcomer to the Academy, one of the first humans to be accepted into the prestigious institution. His kind had only recently been introduced to the broader galactic community, and many still saw humans as primitive and unworthy of the Academy's education. Brian had worked hard to earn his place, and he knew that getting involved in a fight could jeopardize everything he had strived for. Yet, as he watched Reeve and his gang torment Cora, he felt a surge of anger and a need to act. With his fists clenched and his heart pounding, Brian stepped into the circle of bullies. His voice was steady, though his body trembled with adrenaline. "Leave her alone," he commanded. The Krogan turned to face him, amusement flickering in Reeve's eyes. Brian was significantly smaller than the Krogan, his human frame dwarfed by Reeve's bulk. The odds were against him, but Brian didn't back down. "Or what, human?" Reeve sneered, baring his sharp teeth. "You think you can stop me?" Ryan's jaw set with determination. "I won't let you hurt her," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here." His words were met with laughter from Reeve's gang, but the Krogan leader's amusement faded quickly. With a snarl, Reeve swung his fist towards Brian, who barely managed to dodge the blow. Reeve's clawed hand grazed his cheek, drawing blood, but Brian didn't falter. He stood his ground, ready to defend Cora even at the cost of his own safety. Surprised by Brian's resolve, Reeve hesitated for a moment. That moment was all Brian needed. He grabbed Cora's hand and helped her to her feet, his eyes never leaving Reeve's. "Let's go," he said quietly, guiding Cora away from the bullies. Reeve glared after them, his eyes promising retribution, but he didn't follow. Brian's intervention had caught him off guard, and for now that was enough to keep him at bay. As they walked away, Cora looked up at Brian, her face bruised and her eyes filled with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Now they'll come after you too." Brian shrugged, wiping the blood from his cheek. "I couldn't just stand by and watch them hurt you," he replied. "Us newcomers need to stick together, right?" A small smile appeared on Cora's lips, a hint of relief easing the fear in her eyes. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, she felt like she wasn't alone. Over the next few weeks, Brian and Cora spent more time together. They studied in the library, sharing their knowledge of quantum mechanics and stellar formations. Cora introduced Brian to the rich culture of her people, sharing stories and music that spoke of the Elani's deep connection to the cosmos. In return, Brian shared tales of Earth, of humanity's struggles and triumphs. Their friendship grew stronger, a bond forged in the fires of adversity. But not everyone was pleased with this growing alliance. Whispers followed them through the halls, and classmates who once welcomed them now kept their distance. Even some of the professors seemed to regard them with suspicion. Brian knew that standing up to Reeve had made him a target, but he didn't regret his decision. For Cora's sake, it was worth it. As the days passed, the threat of Reeve and his gang loomed larger. Brian could feel their eyes on him, waiting for a chance to strike. But with Cora by his side, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would navigate the dangers of the Galactic Academy and prove that even the smallest voices could make a difference in a galaxy filled with giants. Unlikely allies. The Academy's corridors buzzed with whispers, most of them centered around Brian and his bold confrontation with Reeve. The human's actions had made him a figure of curiosity and admiration among some students, but a source of annoyance and resentment among others. Many couldn't understand why he would risk his standing, his future, for an Elani girl he had only just met. But Brian's sense of justice was unshakable. To him, helping Cora had been the only choice. Days turned into weeks, and while Reeve hadn't made any more overt moves, Brian knew that the Krogan was simply biding his time. Reeve was not the type to forget a slight, and his reputation for holding grudges was well known throughout the Academy. Despite the ever-present threat, Brian and Cora's bond grew stronger. They became an inseparable duo, sharing meals, studying together, and often finding solace in each other's company amidst the vast, impersonal expanse of the Academy. Their partnership didn't go unnoticed by the faculty, either. Professor Morell, a distinguished scholar of galactic history and one of the few teachers who still treated Cora and Brian with respect, took a particular interest in them. Morell was an Azurian, with silvery scales and eyes that shimmered like stars. He had seen countless students come and go, but there was something about Brian and Cora that intrigued him. Perhaps it was their resilience, or the way they supported each other despite the odds. Whatever it was, Morell found himself rooting for them. One day, after a particularly intense lecture on ancient galactic civilizations, Professor Morell called Brian and Cora aside. "I've been watching you too," he said, his voice calm but serious. "You've shown great courage, but courage alone won't keep you safe here. The Academy is a place of learning, yes, but it's also a place of power struggles and alliances. You need allies, not just each other." Brian frowned. "We're fine on our own," he replied. "We don't need anyone else." Cora nodded in agreement, her feathers ruffling slightly. "Brian's right. We can handle ourselves." Morell smiled gently, his expression tinged with a hint of sadness. Bravery is admirable, but isolation can be dangerous. There are others here who feel as you do, who want to stand against the bullying and the fear. Seek them out. Build bridges, not walls. With that, Morell left them, his parting words hanging heavily in the air. Brian and Cora considered Morell's advice. They had relied on each other for so long that the idea of seeking outside help felt strange. Yet, the truth of his words was undeniable. Reeve was not their only adversary. The Academy was full of hidden dangers. The more allies they had, the better their chances of staying safe and making a difference. That evening, as the twin moons of Zephyrus cast a pale glow over the Academy grounds, Brian and Cora made their way to the common area, a large open space where students from different species and backgrounds mingled. It was a place of debate and discussion, where ideas were exchanged and friendships were formed. Brian and Cora had avoided it until now, preferring the solitude of the library or the serenity of the Academy's gardens. But tonight they had a mission. They scanned the room, looking for familiar faces. Brian spotted a group of students gathered around a table, deep in conversation. Among them was Jax, a Cerithian with green scales and a sharp intellect. Brian had shared a few classes with Jax, and he remembered him as someone who valued knowledge over brute strength. Cora noticed Kira, a Felician with fur as black as night and eyes it seemed to see into one's soul. Kira had a reputation for being quiet and observant, always listening, always thinking. Taking a deep breath, Brian led Cora towards Jax's group. As they approached, the conversation paused, and all eyes turned to them. Brian felt a twinge of nervousness, but he pushed it aside. "Hey, Jax," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Mind if we join you?" Jax glanced at the others, then back at Brian. "Sure," he said with a shrug. "Pull up a seat. We were just talking about the latest research on dark matter propulsion." Brian and Cora joined the group, and soon they were caught up in the discussion. As the night wore on, Brian realized that Morel had been right. There were others at the academy who, like him and Cora, wanted to challenge the status quo, to question the old ways and explore new possibilities. By the end of the evening, they had made new friends and found allies who shared their vision of a more just and inclusive academy. As they walked back to their dorms, Brian felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Cora seemed lighter, too, her steps more buoyant. The threat of Reeve and his gang still lingered, but now they were not facing it alone. Together, they were stronger, and with their new allies, they had a chance to create a future where no one had to suffer in silence. Yet, even as they celebrated their newfound friendships, the shadows in the corridors seemed to grow longer, and the whispers of discontent among the students grew louder. The academy was on the brink of change, and Brian and Cora were at the heart of it. Little did they know, their actions had set in motion events that would ripple far beyond the halls of the academy, reaching out into the vast expanse of the galaxy itself. The gathering storm, the newfound camaraderie with Jax, Kira, and others gave Brian and Cora a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, they felt part of something bigger than themselves, a small but growing circle of students united by their desire for fairness and justice. They met regularly in quiet corners of the academy, discussing ideas and strategies, bonding over shared experiences, and finding strength in each other's presence. The academy, with its towering spires and endless corridors, no longer felt as imposing or isolating. Despite the progress they were making, a sense of unease still loomed over them. Reeve and his gang had been uncharacteristically quiet. Brian and Cora knew that the silence was not a sign of surrender, but rather a harbinger of something more sinister. Reeve was no doubt plotting his revenge, and his gang's absence from the usual haunts only confirmed that suspicion. Brian could feel the tension building, like the static charge in the air before a storm. One evening, during a particularly intense study session in the library, Kira's ears perked up, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Brian looked up from his datapad, glancing around. The library was nearly empty, with only a few students scattered among the rows of shelves. "Hear what?" Kira's tail twitched, a sign of her growing agitation. "The silence. It's too quiet. Where are the others?" Cora, who had been engrossed in a research article, looked up as well. The absence of their usual group members suddenly felt ominous. "Jax was supposed to meet us here," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "He's never late." Brian stood up, his heart rate quickening. "We need to find them. Something's wrong." They left the library, moving quickly but cautiously through the hallways. The academy, usually bustling with activity, felt unnaturally still. The lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. As they approached the common area, they heard muffled voices, harsh, taunting, followed by a cry of pain. Brian's heart sank. "It's Reeve," he muttered, breaking into a run. Turning the corner, they found Reeve and his gang standing over Jax, who was crumpled on the floor. The Krogan's eyes gleamed with malice as he loomed over his victim, a cruel smile twisting his features. Brian could see the fear in Jack's eyes, the desperation in his trembling form. Without hesitation, Brian stepped forward, placing himself between Jax and Reeve. "Back off, Reeve," Brian said, his voice cold and steady. "Leave him alone." Reeve's smile widened, his eyes narrowing. "The human hero comes to the rescue again," he sneered. "How predictable. You should have stayed out of this, Brian. Now you're going to pay." Brian's fists clenched at his sides. He could feel Cora's presence behind him, a comforting reminder that he wasn't alone. "I'm not afraid of you," he said firmly. "And neither are they. This ends now." For a moment, the hallway was filled with a tense silence, the air thick with anticipation. Then, with a roar, Reeve lunged at Brian, his clawed hands swinging in a wide arc. Brian ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, and retaliated with a punch to Reeve's midsection. The impact barely phased the Krogan, but it bought Brian enough time to maneuver himself into a defensive stance. Cora moved to Jax's side, helping him to his feet. "Get out of here," she whispered urgently. "Find the others. We need help." Jax nodded weakly, his eyes filled with gratitude. He staggered away, disappearing down the corridor as Cora turned back to face the confrontation. Reeve's gang had joined the fray, surrounding Brian and Cora, cutting off any hope of escape. Brian fought with all his strength, but he was quickly overpowered, his smaller frame no match for Reeve's brute strength. Cora tried to help, but a blow from one of Reeve's followers sent her sprawling to the ground. As Brian struggled to stand, Reeve loomed over him, his face twisted with triumph. "You're pathetic, human," he spat. "Did you really think you could stand up to me? You're nothing." Brian's vision blurred, pain radiating through his body, but he forced himself to look up, meeting Reeve's gaze with defiance. "Maybe I can't beat you," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I won't stop fighting. Not for Cora, not for Jax, not for anyone. You can't break us." Reeve snarled, raising his fist for another strike. But before he could bring it down, a voice rang out, strong and clear. "That's enough." Everyone turned to see Professor Morell standing at the end of the hallway, his eyes blazing with anger. Behind him stood a group of students, Jax, Kira, and others who had rallied to their cause. The sight of their friends, ready to stand with them, filled Brian with a surge of hope. Reeve hesitated, his confidence faltering. Morell's presence, combined with the growing number of students against him, was enough to make him reconsider his actions. With a growl, he lowered his fist, glaring at Brian with undisguised hatred. "This isn't over," Reeve snarled. He turned and stalked away, his gang following close behind, leaving Brian and Cora bruised but victorious. As the tension dissipated, Brian felt the adrenaline drain from his body, replaced by exhaustion. Cora helped him to his feet, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes filled with gratitude. Brian managed a weak smile. "We're in this together," he replied, his voice steady despite the pain. "Always." Morell approached them, his expression softening. "You showed great courage," he said, his voice filled with pride. "But remember, true strength lies not in fighting alone, but in standing together. You have more allies than you realize. Use them." As Brian and Cora stood with their friends, the weight of the past weeks seemed to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The battle with Reeve was far from over. They had taken a stand. They had shown that they would not be intimidated, that they would fight for each other and for a better future. The storm was gathering, but they were ready to face it. Together, they would weather whatever came their way. The Academy would not change overnight, but with every act of defiance, every show of solidarity, they were taking a step towards a brighter, more just world. And in the vast, endless galaxy, their actions would send ripples far beyond the walls of the Academy, inspiring others to stand up, to fight back, and to believe that even the smallest voices could change the course of history. The whisper of shadows. The conflict with Reeve had stirred the waters of the Galactic Academy, bringing long-standing tensions to the surface. Word of the altercation spread quickly, and soon everyone was talking about Brian and his friends' stand against Reeve. The student body began to divide itself, lines being drawn between those who admired Brian's bravery and those who sided with Reeve out of fear or loyalty. Even the professors and staff seemed more watchful, their eyes following Brian and Cora whenever they passed. In the days following the confrontation, Brian and Cora became the unofficial leaders of a growing movement. Students who had once suffered in silence now felt emboldened to speak out, joining Brian's cause and forming a network of support. Jax, with his easygoing nature and wide circle of friends, became their recruiter, spreading the word and rallying others to their side. Kira, with her sharp mind and quick thinking, acted as a strategist, always looking for ways to strengthen their position. Despite their efforts, a sense of unease still lingered. Reeve and his gang had retreated for now, but Brian knew that they were merely biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The atmosphere at the academy grew tense, the air charged with anticipation. The quiet periods between classes were filled with whispers and glances, the students on edge, as if sensing the approach of a storm. One afternoon, as Brian and Koro were reviewing notes in the common area, they were approached by a small, nervous-looking student. His name was Rilo, a member of the Avari species, known for their keen intellect and diminutive stature. Rilo had always been quiet, keeping to himself and avoiding conflict. Now he stood before them, wringing his hands, his eyes darting around as if expecting Reeve to appear at any moment. "Brian Cora," Rilo began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I need to talk to you. It's about Reeve." Brian and Cora exchanged a glance. "What is it?" Brian asked, motioning for Rilo to sit with them. Rilo hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before leaning in closer. "Reeve's planning something," he said, his voice trembling. "I overheard him talking to his gang. They're going to make a move soon, something big. I think they're going to try and take you out, Brian. You and Cora." Cora's eyes widened, her feathers bristling with alarm. "Are you sure?" she asked. "What exactly did you hear?" Rilo nodded, his face pale. "They didn't say much, just that they're going to make an example out of you. They want to show everyone what happens to those who defy them. I'm scared, Brian. If they go through with this, no one will feel safe." Brian's jaw tightened, anger flaring within him. He had known that Reeve would retaliate, but the thought of his friends being in danger filled him with dread. He looked at Cora, her expression mirroring his own resolve. They had to act, and quickly. "Thank you for telling us, Rilo," Brian said, placing a reassuring hand on the Avari's shoulder. "We'll make sure Reeve doesn't get away with this, but we need to be smart about it. We can't let him scare us into making a mistake." Rilo nodded, relief flooding his features. "I'll help however I can," he said. "Just tell me what to do." Over the next few days, Brian and his friends worked tirelessly, gathering information and devising a plan. They spread the word discreetly, warning others of Reeve's intentions and urging them to stay alert. Jax and Kira took turns keeping watch, ready to alert the group at the first sign of trouble. The tension was palpable, every noise and shadow sending their hearts racing. It was during one of these watchful nights that Cora stumbled upon something unexpected. She had been wandering the quieter parts of the academy, lost in thought, when she heard voices coming from an empty classroom. Curious, she crept closer, peering through the crack in the door. What she saw made her gasp. Inside the classroom stood Reeve, but he wasn't alone. He was speaking with Professor Graal, one of the academy's senior instructors. Graal was a stern-looking Saurian, known for his strict discipline and harsh demeanor. Cora had always found him intimidating, but she had never suspected he would be involved with Reeve. The two were deep in conversation, their voices low but urgent. "This has gone on long enough," Graal was saying, his voice a harsh whisper. "The human and his friends are causing too much trouble. The academy is supposed to be a place of order, not chaos. If you can't handle them, Reeve, then perhaps it's time I intervened." Reeve's eyes flashed with anger. "I don't need your help, Graal," he snapped. "I have a plan. Brian won't be a problem much longer. Just make sure the professors turn a blind eye when the time comes." Cora's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, shock and fear mingling within her. It wasn't just Reeve they were up against. They had allies in the academy's staff. This was bigger than she had realized. She had to warn Brian. Backing away from the door, Cora hurried down the hallway, her mind racing. As she rounded the corner, she collided with Kira, who had been on her way to check on her. "Cora, what's wrong?" Kira asked, catching her friend before she could fall. "Reeve, Professor Grull," Cora gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "They're working together. Reeve has the support of the faculty. We're not just fighting him, we're fighting the system." Kira's eyes widened, her expression turning grim. "This changes everything," she said. "We need to tell Brian, and we need to be ready. If Reeve has the professors on his side, then we're in more danger than we thought." Together, they made their way back to Brian, their minds racing with the implications of what they had just learned. The battle against Reeve was no longer just a fight against a bully. It was a struggle against a corrupt system that sought to silence those who dared to stand up for what was right. As they gathered their friends and shared what Cora had overheard, Brian felt a steady resolve settle within him. They would not back down. They would expose the truth, no matter the cost. The storm was no longer just on the horizon. It was here, and they were ready to face it. With their allies at their side and the knowledge of Reeve's plans, Brian and his friends prepared for the coming battle. The academy might be filled with shadows, but they would not let fear dictate their actions. They would shine a light on the darkness, and in doing so, inspire others to join them. The storm had arrived, and in its wake, the true test of their courage and unity would begin. The gathering storm. The revelation of Professor Grull's involvement shook Brian and his friends to their core. It was one thing to stand up against Reeve and his gang, but knowing that a figure of authority was actively supporting their adversaries made the situation even more perilous. Brian realized that they were not just battling bullies, they were challenging a system that condoned oppression and fear. If they were to stand a chance, they needed a plan, and they needed more allies. As word of Reeve and Professor Grull's alliance spread among the students, it became clear that many shared Brian's outrage. Whispers of rebellion filled the academy, students speaking in hushed tones about the injustice they faced. Brian, Cora, Jax, and Kira found themselves at the center of this growing movement, their dormitory room turning into a meeting spot for those who sought change. One evening, as the group gathered to discuss their next steps, Jax looked around the room, noting the faces of the students who had joined them. There were students from all corners of the galaxy, Avari, Alani, Terrans, and more. Each had their own story, their own reason for standing against Reeve and the corruption within the academy. Jax felt a surge of pride, knowing they were not alone. "We have to do more than just defend ourselves," Brian said, addressing the group. "We need to show the entire academy what's happening. We need to expose Reeve and Professor Grull, make everyone see the truth." "But how?" asked Neela, a tall, silver-skinned Zellan girl known for her keen intellect. "The professors will never believe us without proof, and Reeve's gang is too strong for us to confront directly." Brian paused, deep in thought. He knew Neela was right. They needed evidence, something undeniable that could rally the rest of the academy to their side. "What if we could record them?" Brian suggested. "Catch Reeve and Grull in the act, prove that they're working together. If we could get that on video, they wouldn't be able to deny it." "That's risky," Kira pointed out. "If we're caught, we could be expelled, or worse." "I know," Brian admitted, "but it's a risk we have to take. If we don't, Reeve will continue terrorizing the students, and the corruption will only spread. We can't stay silent." Cora nodded in agreement. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "I'm small and fast. I can get close enough to record them without being seen. We can set up a distraction to keep Reeve and his gang occupied while I get the footage." The plan was daring, but it was their best shot. The group spent the next few days preparing, ensuring every detail was accounted for. They assigned roles, organized distractions, and created escape routes. It was a delicate balance of bravery and caution, and every member of the group knew the stakes. Finally, the day of their plan arrived. Brian's heart pounded as he made his way to the designated meeting spot, a secluded section of the academy where Reeve often met with his gang. Cora, hidden in the shadows, had a small recording device in hand, ready to capture the evidence they needed. Jax and Kira were in position, ready to create a diversion. As they waited, the tension in the air was palpable. Brian glanced at Cora, her feathers fluttering with anxiety, but her eyes were determined. He gave her a reassuring nod, silently urging her to be careful. They could hear footsteps approaching, and moments later, Reeve and his gang appeared, followed by Professor Growl. Brian took a deep breath, signaling to Jax and Kira. It was time to act. Jax activated the first distraction, setting off a series of loud bangs that echoed through the corridors, drawing the attention of Reeve's gang. As they turned to investigate, Kira moved swiftly, placing a holographic projector in the hallway, creating the illusion of a fight breaking out between students. The gang members rushed towards the scene, eager to join the fray, leaving Reeve and Professor Growl momentarily alone. This was Cora's chance. She slipped closer, staying hidden in the shadows, her recording device aimed at the two conspirators. Her heart pounded as she crept forward, every nerve in her body on edge. She could hear Reeve's voice, low and angry, as he spoke to Growl. "This needs to end, Growl," Reeve was saying. "The human and his friends are becoming too much of a problem. If we don't deal with them now, they'll turn the whole academy against us." Growl's response was cold, devoid of empathy. "Do what you must, Reeve. Just remember our agreement. If you fail, you'll be on your own." Cora's hands trembled as she held the recorder steady, capturing every word. She knew this was the evidence they needed, but the risk was far from over. Suddenly, one of the gang members glanced back and spotted her. His eyes widened, and he shouted, "There, it's the Elani. She's recording us." Panic surged through Cora as she turned and fled, clutching the recorder to her chest. Reeve roared in fury, ordering his gang to chase after her. Brian and Jax sprang into action, blocking the path to give Cora a head start. "Go," Brian shouted. "Get that recording to safety." Cora ran as fast as she could, her heart racing. She could hear the pounding footsteps behind her, the shouts of Reeve's gang as they pursued her. She zigzagged through the corridors, ducking into narrow passages and darting through doors, her mind focused on one thing: getting the evidence to Brian. As she rounded a corner, she collided with Kira, nearly knocking them both to the ground. "Cora, are you okay?" Kira asked, helping her up. "I've got it," Cora panted, holding up the recorder. "But they're right behind me." Kira nodded, understanding the urgency. "Follow me," she said, leading Cora down a hidden staircase that few knew existed. They descended quickly, emerging in a small courtyard where Brian and Jax were waiting. Cora handed the recorder to Brian, relief flooding through her. "I got it," she said. "We have the proof." Brian smiled, his face shining with pride. "You did great, Cora," he said. "Now we just need to show this to the rest of the academy." Their moment of triumph was short-lived. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the courtyard as Reeve and his gang appeared, fury etched on their faces. "You think you can stop us?" Reeve snarled. "You're just a bunch of weaklings. We'll crush you and your pathetic resistance." Brian stood tall, holding the recorder in his hand. "We're not afraid of you, Reeve," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "And we're not alone. This ends now." As Reeve lunged towards them, a sudden movement from the shadows stopped him in his tracks. Dozens of students stepped forward, surrounding Reeve and his gang. They were students of all shapes and sizes, different species united under a common cause. They had heard the truth, and they stood with Brian and his friends. Reeve looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. His gang members hesitated, their confidence wavering as they saw the sheer number of students arrayed against them. Professor Growl, who had followed behind, watched with a scowl, his authority slipping away. "This isn't over," Reeve growled, his eyes narrowing. "You may have won today, but we'll be back." Brian met his gaze, unflinching. "We'll be ready," he replied. As Reeve and his gang retreated, the students erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the halls of the academy. Brian looked at his friends, his heart swelling with hope. They had taken the first step towards change, but the battle was far from over. The storm had gathered, but now they had the strength to face it together. With the proof of Reeves' corruption in hand and the support of their fellow students, Brian and his friends knew they had the power to challenge the darkness. The light of truth had pierced the shadows, and the fight for justice had only just begun. Turning the tide, with the evidence of Reeve and Professor Grohl's conspiracy in their possession, Brian and his friends knew they had to act quickly. The tension at the Galactic Academy was palpable. Every student had heard about the confrontation in the courtyard. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope among those who had long suffered in silence. Now, it was time to bring the truth to light and expose the corruption that had taken root in their institution. Brian, Cora, Jax, and Kira gathered in their dormitory, joined by a group of their most trusted allies. The room buzzed with energy as they discussed their next move. They had the recording, but showing it to the right people would be crucial. They needed to ensure it reached the eyes and ears of those who could make a difference. "We need to get this to Headmaster Velar," Jax said firmly. The headmaster of the academy was known for his integrity and commitment to justice, but he had also been somewhat aloof, focused more on academic excellence than the day-to-day issues among the students. If he sees this, he'll have no choice but to take action. "Agreed," Brian nodded. "But we can't just walk into his office and hand this over. Reeve and Growl will be watching every move we make. They'll try to stop us if they suspect we're going to the headmaster." Kira, ever the strategist, leaned forward, her mind racing with possibilities. "What if we create a diversion? Something big enough to draw their attention away from us. Then, while they're distracted, one of us can sneak into the headmaster's office and deliver the recording." Cora considered this, her feathers ruffling slightly as she thought. It could work, but the diversion has to be convincing. We need to split their forces and keep them occupied long enough for us to get the evidence to Velar. "I'll do it," Brian said. "I'll be the one to take the recording to the headmaster. Cora, Jax, and Kira, you handle the diversion. We need to time this perfectly. If they catch wind of what we're doing, everything we've worked for will be at risk." The group nodded in agreement, the plan taking shape. They would stage a confrontation in the main atrium, a public display that would draw the attention of Reeve's gang. Meanwhile, Brian would slip away, using the chaos to make his way to the headmaster's office. The next day dawned, and the atmosphere at the academy was tense. The halls were filled with whispers, students speaking in hushed tones about the brewing conflict. Brian could feel the weight of their expectations, the hope that they placed in him and his friends. Failure was not an option. As the time approached, Brian stood with his friends near the entrance to the atrium. Cora's eyes met his, her expression serious. "Be careful," she said softly. "If anything goes wrong, just get out of there. We can't lose you." "I'll be fine," Brian assured her, though his heart was pounding. "Just make sure the distraction works. I'll handle the rest." With a deep breath, he slipped away, moving quickly and quietly towards the headmaster's office. Meanwhile, Cora, Jax, and Kira entered the atrium, their presence drawing the eyes of the students gathered there. Reeve and his gang were already in the area, lounging with an air of confidence. As Cora stepped forward, the bully straightened, recognizing the challenge in her stance. "Reeve," Cora called out, her voice echoing through the atrium. "We're not afraid of you anymore. The truth is out, and everyone knows what you and Professor Grohl have been doing." Reeve's eyes narrowed, his expression twisting into a snarl. "You think you can stand against me, Elani? You and your little human friend are nothing. I'll crush you both and anyone else who gets in my way." As Reeve advanced, Jax and Kira moved to flank him, creating a scene that quickly drew a crowd. Students began to gather, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. This was exactly what they had hoped for, a public spectacle that would force Reeve's gang to engage and leave Brian with a clear path. While the confrontation played out in the atrium, Brian made his way through the quieter corridors of the academy. He moved quickly, knowing time was of the essence. His heart pounded in his chest, each step bringing him closer to the headmaster's office. He could hear the distant sounds of the confrontation echoing through the halls, the shouts and cries of his friends holding Reeve and his gang at bay. At last, Brian reached the headmaster's office. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts, then knocked on the door. There was a pause before a voice called, "Enter." Brian stepped inside, finding Headmaster Vela seated behind his desk, looking up in mild surprise. Vela was a tall, dignified figure, with silver hair and a calm demeanor. He regarded Brian with curiosity, clearly not expecting a student to visit unannounced. "Brian Johnson, isn't it?" Vela said, raising an eyebrow. "What brings you here? You look troubled." Brian wasted no time, pulling out the recording device and holding it up. "Headmaster Vela, I have evidence, proof that Reeve and Professor Grawl are conspiring to control and intimidate the students. They've been using fear to maintain their power, and it needs to stop. Please, you need to see this." Vela's expression grew serious, and he gestured for Brian to approach. Brian handed over the device, and Vela activated it, watching as the recording played. The headmaster's face darkened as he listened to the incriminating conversation between Reeve and Grawl. When the recording ended, Vela leaned back in his chair, a frown creasing his brow. "This is deeply troubling," Vela said, his voice heavy with concern. "If what this recording shows is true, then there has been a grave breach of trust within the Academy. I will call an emergency meeting of the faculty immediately. We must investigate these allegations and ensure the safety of our students." Relief washed over Brian, knowing that he had done what was necessary. "Thank you, Headmaster," he said. "Please act quickly. Reeve and his gang won't stop until they've silenced anyone who opposes them." Vela nodded, rising from his seat. "You've done the right thing, Brian. I will see to it that justice is served. Go now, and tell your friends to stay safe. We will handle this." Brian left the office, his steps lighter, a sense of hope filling his heart. He made his way back towards the atrium, where he found the confrontation still in full swing. Reeve and his gang were shouting, trying to intimidate Cora and the others, but the gathered students were no longer afraid. They had seen Brian's resolve, felt the unity in their cause, and now stood together against the bullies. Brian pushed through the crowd, joining his friends. "It's done," he said quietly to Cora. "The headmaster has a recording. He's going to call a meeting. This ends now." Cora's eyes lit up with relief, and she squeezed Brian's hand. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." As the headmaster arrived, accompanied by several faculty members, the crowd fell silent. Headmaster Vela's voice rang out, firm and authoritative. "Reeve, Professor Grawl, stepped forward. We have received evidence of serious misconduct, and an investigation will commence immediately." Reeve's face twisted in anger, but he knew he was cornered. Professor Grawl appeared behind him, his expression cold and calculating, realizing too late that his schemes had been exposed. The tide had turned. The students of the Galactic Academy had found their voice, and with Brian, Cora, and their friends leading the way, they had taken the first step towards a brighter future. As the faculty escorted Reeve and Grawl away, the crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filled with hope and determination. The darkness that had once clouded their lives was lifting, replaced by the light of truth and the strength of unity. Brian stood with his friends, a smile spreading across his face. They had faced the storm and emerged victorious. The Galactic Academy would never be the same, but now it would be a place of learning, justice, and friendship, a place where even the smallest voices could be heard. A new beginning. The following days at the Galactic Academy were unlike anything Brian, Cora, or any of the other students had ever experienced. The revelation of Reeve and Professor Grall's conspiracy sent shockwaves through the institution. An emergency assembly was called, and Headmaster Vela addressed the entire student body, outlining the investigation's findings and the steps being taken to ensure such corruption would never take root again. Reeve and his gang, stripped of their power and influence, were expelled from the academy. Professor Grell faced severe disciplinary action, his reputation in tatters as he was removed from his position. The swift and decisive action taken by the academy's leadership sent a clear message: injustice and bullying would not be tolerated. With the threat of Reeve and Grell gone, the atmosphere at the academy changed. Students who had once lived in fear began to come forward, sharing their experiences and supporting one another. A sense of solidarity and community flourished, replacing the isolation that had once dominated the halls. Brian and his friends found themselves at the heart of this new spirit, their actions inspiring others to stand up and speak out. The days were busy, filled with meetings and discussions about how to improve the academy's environment. Committees were formed, including students from all backgrounds and species, working together to create policies that promoted fairness and respect. Brian was often sought after for his input, his bravery in exposing the corruption making him a natural leader. One afternoon, as he sat with Cora, Jax, and Kira in their favorite spot under the academy's great tree, they reflected on everything that had happened. The air was warm, the leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they could relax. "I still can't believe it," Cora said, her eyes shining. "We actually did it. We made a difference." Jax grinned, leaning back against the tree. "Yeah, we did. And look at us now. The academy's a different place. It feels safe." Kira nodded, her tail flicking contentedly. "But we can't get complacent. We've set things in motion, but there's still work to be done. We need to keep pushing for change to make sure this never happens again." Brian smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "You're right. This is just the beginning. But knowing we've got each other, that we're not alone, it makes it all worth it." As they sat together, the conversation flowed easily, filled with plans and ideas for the future. They spoke of new projects, ways to help incoming students feel welcome, and initiatives to promote understanding among the diverse cultures represented at the academy. Their friendship, forged in the fires of adversity, was stronger than ever, and their shared experiences had bound them together in ways they could never have imagined. The news of their victory spread beyond the academy, reaching the far corners of the galaxy. Messages of support and admiration poured in, students from other institutions inspired by their story. Brian received a communication from his family back on Earth, their pride and love evident in their words. It was a moment of connection that filled him with joy, knowing he had made them proud. In the weeks that followed, Brian and his friends continued their work, balancing their studies with their newfound responsibilities. The academy flourished under their leadership, and a sense of optimism spread. The darkness that had once loomed over them was gone, replaced by a bright future. One day, as Brian walked through the halls, he noticed a group of younger students huddled together, their expressions serious. He recognized the look in their eyes, the same determination he had felt when he stood against Reeve. Curious, he approached them, smiling warmly. "Hey there," Brian greeted. "What's going on?" The students looked up, their faces lighting up when they recognized him. One of them, a small girl with bright blue hair, stepped forward. "We've been talking about starting a club," she said. "A club for students who want to make sure everyone feels safe and included here. We heard what you and your friends did, and we want to keep that going." Brian felt a swell of pride. "That's a great idea," he said. "I'd be happy to help you get started. This academy belongs to all of us, and it's up to us to make it the best place it can be." The girl's face lit up with a smile. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you." As he walked away, Brian couldn't help but smile. The academy was in good hands, the seeds of change already taking root. He knew that the road ahead would have its challenges, but with friends like Cora, Jax, and Kira by his side, and the support of the student body, they could face anything. Their story, once one of fear and oppression, had become one of hope and unity. The Galactic Academy was no longer just a place of learning. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when individuals stood together against injustice. As the sun set over the academy, casting a golden glow over the courtyard, Brian looked towards the future, filled with confidence and excitement for the adventures yet to come. And so, with a new beginning dawning, Brian and his friends knew that they had the power to shape their world. They had found their voices, and with them, they would continue to inspire others, ensuring that the light of truth and justice would always shine bright in the galaxy.